My name is Matt Gunter. I am the Bishop of the Diocese of Fond du Lac, the Episcopal Church in northeast and central Wisconsin. I'd like to invite you to join me on a Lenten retreat as together we live in these confusing and crazy, unsettling and anxious times as we deal with the realities of the pandemic of the coronavirus, COVID-19, and the sequestering that we are all attempting as we seek to not spread the contagion. It is an unsettling time, and it can feel a little bit like things are coming apart at the seams. And the question I'd like to explore with you in this retreat is, how do we hold it together when things seem to be falling apart? And the way I hold it together, or at least one way that I hold it together, is by holding on to this. This is a hazelnut. I carry a hazelnut around with me in my pocket all the time, and now and then I reach in and I touch it, because the hazelnut reminds me of Julian of Norwich, one of the great English mystics who lived in the 14th and early 15th century. And the hazelnut reminds me of Julian, but still more, through Julian, it reminds me of God. And I want to share with you a bit about Julian of Norwich and the times in which she lived, and then speak a bit more specifically about one of the visions that she had. So Julian was born in 1342 and died in 1416. As a young woman, she became very, very ill. So ill, in fact, that they thought she was going to die. The priest came and gave her last rites and told her to prepare herself for death. And as she lay on her sickbed, Julian looked at the crucifix on the wall in her room. And as she lay there sick, preparing for death, she had a vision. From the crucifix, Jesus began to speak to her words of comfort and hope. And Julian recovered from that illness and spent the rest of her life reflecting on those visions that she had when she was so sick as a young woman. She became an anchorite, which was a way of life that some people, especially women, entered during that period in history. And an anchorite lived a life that was semi-sequestered, interestingly enough, given that many of us are now living semi-sequestered lives. But an anchorite, like Julian, would live in a simple cell attached to a church, often with a window into the church so the anchorite could participate in the worship service and Eucharist in the church. And then there would be another door or window out into the public. And people would come to the anchorite. Certainly people came to Julian for spiritual counsel and guidance. In fact, there was another famous woman of the era, Marjorie Kemp, who in her book, writing about her journey seeking spiritual wisdom, she talks about coming to speak to Julian to get counsel from this holy, wise woman. Julian eventually wrote down her reflections on the visions that she had. She may have written the book herself, Revelations of Divine Love, or she may have dictated it to someone else. It's unclear if she was able to write herself, but she certainly was learned, and that is reflected in her writings. In fact, some have said, and I would agree, that she is one of the great theologians of the church. In fact, she was the first woman to write anything in the English language in the late 1300s. Julian lived in a challenging time, but in spite of that, she was able to live with faith and hope and a deep and abiding peace, largely because of her faith in God and in particular the visions that God granted her. I want to look particularly with you at a specific vision that she had, a vision in which she saw something the size and shape of a hazelnut. And I will read that vision to you. And in this he showed me a little thing, the quantity of a hazelnut, lying in the palm of my hand, as it seemed, and it was round as any ball. I looked upon it with the eye of my understanding and thought, what may this be? And it was answered generally thus, it is all that is made. I marveled how it might last, for I thought it might suddenly have fallen to nothing for littleness. And I was answered in my understanding, it lasts and ever shall, for God loves it. And so have all things their beginning by the love of God. In this little thing I saw three properties. First is that God made it. The second, that God loves it. And the third, that God keeps it. But what is this to me? Truly, the Creator, the Keeper, the Lover. For until I am substantially one to Him, I may never have full rest nor true bliss. That is to say, until I am so fastened to Him that there is nothing that is made between my God and me. This little thing which is created seemed to me as if it could have fallen into nothing because of its littleness. We need to have knowledge of this, so that we may delight in despising as nothing everything created, so as to love and have uncreated God. For this is the reason why our hearts and souls are not in perfect ease, because here we seek rest in this thing which is so little, in which there is no rest. And we do not know our God, who is almighty, all-wise, and all-good, for He is true rest. God wishes to be known, and it pleases Him that we should rest in Him. For everything which is beneath Him is not sufficient for us. And this is the reason why no soul is at rest until it has despised as nothing all things which are created. When it, by its will, has become nothing for love, to have Him who is everything, then it is able to receive spiritual rest. It's a remarkable vision, and in fact, in this vision, Julian in many ways summarizes the Christian teaching about creation. On the one hand, creation is created by God, and God delights in that creation. And Christians believe that, as God says in the story in Genesis, after He creates everything, it is good. Indeed, it is very good. Creation, the material world, is God's good gift, created out of His love and sustained by that same love. On the other hand, as Julian points out, as wonderful as that creation is, it is not in itself substantial or sufficient enough to satisfy our deepest need, our deepest longing, our deepest desire. And if we trust too much in created things, any created thing, however good it is, it will not finally satisfy us, because, as Julian points out, and as Augustine of Hippo pointed out, until we rest in God, we will be restless. So there it is, creation as Christians understand it, a good thing, a beautiful thing, a delightful thing, but in the end, not a sufficient thing for the eternal hunger that is in each human heart. Only God can finally fulfill that hunger. Only God is finally sufficient. In the next video, we will look at the historical context that Julian lived in. She had this vision of a thing, the quantity of a hazelnut, that she thought was so small and insubstantial that she wondered how it did not dissolve into nothing, how it did not just come apart. And Julian lived in a time when she had good reason, as many did, to wonder how things held together, because things seemed so likely to fall apart.